Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for coming today. It's nice to see so many of you here. I hope you're all enjoying the Web We Want Festival. Today we're going to be talking about open democracy and using the web to change the world. And I'm delighted to say we've got a great panel here today to help me with this discussion. In my career, I've chaired a few rowdy focus groups, so I'm hoping that today is not going to be like that, but we'll see how we get on. My name's Keiran Pedley. I'm an Associate Director at GfK NOP. My background is primarily in opinion polling and elections and sort of campaigns and looking at how we evaluate campaigns. And a lot of these topics we're going to be discussing today are very relevant to that. The web has changed fundamentally what I do in terms of how we poll and measure the opinion of the public, but also how organisations that I work with sort of get their message across. So I think it's a huge topic, and I'm glad that we've got such a distinguished panel here today. Just before we introduce them, and they're going to say a few remarks before we open it up to a bit of a discussion on the panel, but also a Q&A with the audience. There's a number of issues to explore, really. First and foremost, I think anybody that's been awake in the last 20 years will know that the internet has fundamentally changed how we communicate, whether with our friends and families or how we interact with organisations that want to influence us. These might be politicians looking for our vote, organisations looking to sell things to us, or other organisations looking to sort of communicate their message and trying to influence our opinion. And I think within that, there's a number of opportunities that this presents to empower people that otherwise haven't had a voice, maybe, or to get our own message across in new and exciting ways. But there's also challenges too, in terms of how do we make sure people aren't left behind. And obviously, how do we police the web as well? Obviously, a very contentious issue. Who's responsible for that? And what can and should we be doing? I think there's a couple of different examples I would use in the recent past. I think we just come out of a very intense Scottish referendum debate, something that I've been very interested in. We saw how one of the striking elements of that was very high turnout, which meant that certain groups of voters who hadn't previously been involved in politics or campaigning were much more involved and much more engaged, such as young people, particularly on the web. And we saw that the social media campaign was very vociferous and strong and generally considered to be something that the Yes campaign may have edged. Having said that, obviously we all know that the No campaign was won, so this presents something of a challenge for campaign organisations. How do we utilise the web but make sure we're reaching all of the different audiences that we need to? And from maybe a darker side, you look at the internet troll, which is not unique, of course, to the Scottish referendum debate, but certainly was present. And how should and can we deal with those things? And then when we look internationally, we see the Arab Spring obviously created, wasn't necessarily caused by social media, but was something that social media certainly helped influence and develop. But at the same time, where there's positive change, perhaps there's more negative campaigning from Islamic State when we see that these horrific images of people being beheaded online and those images being spread around to recruit sort of vulnerable people or to spread the message they want to. So challenges and opportunities for both the positive and negative in terms of how being a more open society on the web is for us. And I'm pleased, I'll open it up to the panel now. We've got a very distinguished audience. We've got Ellery Biddle, editor of Global Voices Advocacy. Everyone wants to wave, I guess, when we go through. David Steer, Director of Advocacy at the Mozilla Foundation. Timothy Karr, Senior Director of Strategy at Free Press. Robin Priestley, Campaign Manager at 38 Degrees. Emma Howard, Digital Journalism Trainee with The Guardian. And Chi Onwurah, Shadow Cabinet Office Minister for Digital Content and Cybersecurity. Hopefully I've got the title correct.
Doesn't matter.
So I guess we'll open up to sort of 3 to 5 minutes of discussion from you guys in terms of what your experiences are in this topic and the things you want to talk about, and then we'll have a bit of a discussion ourselves. So Robin, do you want to go first?
Yeah, absolutely. So hello, my name's Robin. I'm from 38 Degrees. I don't know, does anyone here get my emails? Does anyone put your hand up?
Wow.
There we go. Excellent. So you guys know what I do. For everyone else, just in case you don't, 38 Degrees is a campaign organisation, a UK-based campaign organisation who organise using the internet. We're not an online campaign organisation, but we use the internet as a tool. What we do is we're member-led. So essentially, we have a giant, great mailing list of I don't know what it is at the moment, 2.5, nearly 3 million people, I think. And every week we kind of send out a big poll to, to kind of like a random selection of people saying, what do you want to campaign? What should we be campaigning on at the moment? What's the big issues of the day? Is it NHS privatisation? Is it, kind of stopping our forests and being sold off? Is it the climate? And essentially our members kind of decide what we should be campaigning on. And then we, as a staff team, kind of try and work out a way of harnessing this power of this kind of mob and kind of, focusing it on a kind of like tangible change, so that, and kind of offering up a kind of tangible way that you kind of, can get involved and can kind of, make a difference in the UK. And that can be from very, very low bar actions, for example, signing a petition, and kind of, voicing your discontent, through to, and we have what we call a kind of ladder of engagement. So, essentially we'll start off with a very simple kind of, sign your petition, pop your name here, and works through to, it might be kind of writing to your MP, it might be turning up at a kind of, in the town centre, handing out leaflets, it might be kind of like organising a big public meeting, or, kind of a big march in the streets, or whatever it is. And it's very much a kind of way of, kind of engaging people in the issues of the day, kind of, and kind of helping people create change. One of the things that we've kind of launched recently, my job now is running a kind of site we call Campaigns by You, which is essentially a little like the kind of, I don't know, like there's, essentially we enable people to set up petition. We have this great technology that's enabled us to kind of do all sorts of things, from stopping the government selling off the forests through to kind of battling them over, NHS privatisation. And we thought, we'll open this up because there's only so many campaigns we can run at a time, but there's so many issues that people want to campaign on. So I run a team of people, essentially letting people across the country running campaigns on the issues close to their hearts. And that can be everything from a guy in Frome in Somerset trying to stop a landmark local tree from being chopped down, through to someone trying to kind of get a crossing put outside of their school, through to kind of big kind of national issues like I don't know, stopping the Lake District kind of being turned into a nuclear dump, or all sorts of different things. And so I run a team of people, kind of help, kind of essentially helping people take action on the issues, that they have, and kind of giving them, running a team of, people to help give them advice and so on. And it's just, it's one of the fascinating things I think about kind of the way that technology's enabled us to kind of interact with each other, enable people to, not just kind of, I think one of the things we're very much trying to do is, rather than kind of the 38 Degrees office being a hub of kind of like dishing out information and being like, sign this petition, do this, very much trying to kind of create now a network, and a kind of like enabling, putting the tools in people's hands for them to create the change that, that they want to see in the world. And kind of, and I think, it's a wonderful, it's been a wonderful journey these last kind of, 5 years, I think, that we've been going. And yeah, I think, it's going to be incredibly interesting coming up to the next general election, and kind of seeing how things, people being engaged, being empowered, having the tools at their fingertips, are able to, to kind of embed and kind of, and kind of take charge of, and like, hopefully, I suppose, create, kind of have the conversations that they want to have, force the kind of the debates around the election to be on the issues that people want to talk about, as opposed to necessarily parties drawing their battle lines on, because they may not necessarily be the things that we want to talk about. We might want to talk about, we might want to talk about the climate. We might want to talk about whatever it is. And, if the battle is over kind of, very small changes in the economy or something like that, that's not necessarily where we want to be. Excellent. There we go.
Hi, my name's Emma. I'm a journalist at The Guardian. It's a real privilege to be on this panel because I've only been there less than a year, but it's been a really amazing experience. I was brought in as part of a digital trainee scheme, which is a new scheme designed to bring in people who have digital ideas and a belief that the World Wide Web can be really exciting for journalism and for public debate. And I always have to remind people that just because I've got digital in my job title doesn't mean I can manage your computer. Certainly doesn't mean that. It means that there's so many more exciting ways now to tell a story. But fundamentally for me, what's really exciting about it is the shift in power. So I think about when an article of mine gets published, people say to me, oh, it must be really exciting. And it is exciting, but it's also kind of terrifying because you know that there's thousands of people waiting to jump below the line and point out your flaws, your prejudices, your mistakes. I'm glad to say it doesn't happen too often. But they're also there on social media, and that's that's a wonderful thing, because I think there's always been this idea that journalists hold people in power to account, but who holds the journalists to account? Because they're in a position of power as well. And I feel like the answer now is the internet. It's people on the internet. And secondly, what's also really exciting, I think, is that it means diversity. It means that journalism and public debate is now so much more diverse, or is increasingly becoming more diverse. And this is about people are able to share their opinions and write about what's happening themselves, but this can also feed into the mainstream media. So a lot of what I've been doing, I've been part of a team called the Community Team at The Guardian, which is a lot more exciting than it sounds. And it's all about how you get the audience to feed into the journalism. So, for example, the Ministry of Justice last year announced a policy to ban books from prisons. And when this happened, we searched through social media and we looked at who's talking about this. And we found like several ex-prisoners talking about it, and eventually found a guy who used to run the prison library. And so we got him to write a piece for us, which is a perspective that you would really struggle to find before. So I think, although it's always been the case that there's been always people out there who know far more about a subject than a journalist does on whatever you're writing about, the web now means that we have a lot more access to them, and there's not really any excuse anymore for us to not reach out and try to find the people that our story directly impacts on. And a final example would be that the New Yorker last year named a man called Brown Moses as the foremost journalistic expert on munitions in Syria. And this is really remarkable because he's done it all from his sofa in a Leicester suburb. And it's just the fact that he's given the time to meticulously go through YouTube videos and go through other sources online, thousands of miles away from where it's happening. And I think this is a really fantastic thing, because it means that stories that we never otherwise would have found are getting onto social media and feeding into the mainstream media as a result of that. And that's terrifically exciting for democracy.
Well, this makes a wonderful segue. So my name is Ellery, and I come from the US, and I work for an organization called Global Voices. We actually, how many people here have ever seen our website? Okay, all right, good. So Global Voices is both a media organization that produces news and stories and a community. Our model is kind of peculiar. We are completely decentralized. We don't have an office anywhere. We have contributors in 167 countries. And these people are bloggers, writers, activists, photographers. But we all sort of think of ourselves as a community that is working together to tell stories about places that you don't hear about very much in the mainstream media, or to tell stories about something that a lot of people are talking about, but from a very different and usually local perspective. And a lot of what has been happening with more forward-thinking big news organizations like The Guardian is that they've started to do what we have been doing for a while, which is like, look at social media, look at the blogosphere. Like, so many people are saying things about what's happening in a situation like, I mean, you mentioned the Arab uprisings. When protests started in Cairo in 2011, we had a team of 20 people who were all bloggers and activists who had all been working there together for years, both writing about what was happening and writing their sort of political and social opinions online, but then also actually super involved with activist networks. So our coverage in that moment, we could have somebody who was on the ground, like actually at Tahrir Square, writing about what they were seeing, but then others who were following what was happening on Twitter and in other social media spaces and able to kind of link together what are all the different things people are saying. Why is everyone here? Because they want democracy? That's pretty vague, broad, description that we got again and again and again from big media sources, where in reality there were a lot of different interests and ideas and politics that drove people to this moment. So that's what we do. The way that we are is sort of a reflection of the web itself. We came together as about 40 bloggers in different countries who were interested in connecting with each other, and began to grow and grow. And we have only 9 full-time staff, and the rest of our contributors are all volunteers. So we have an extremely kind of loose model of I wouldn't even call it governance. I mean, the way that we work is very driven by the community and what the community wants. And not only is our sort of like our connections with each other as people built kind of on this trust that we have built up because we are all giving to this project, but we actually also sort of feel like we've kind of built up trust with our readers, and that has a little bit to do with the fact that we're a volunteer organization. And so there are plenty of people that come into Global Voices with a political agenda and would like to carry that out there, and that's something that we sort of organize and figure out a way to deal with. But by and large, people contribute just because they care and they think that they have a story to tell that is important and that might change somebody's mind about something somewhere. Am I okay on time? Can I say like a little bit? Okay. The project that I work on is, we have a project focused on censorship and surveillance online, and sort of what happens to people who are speaking about a political or social issue and are punished legally or extra legally. And we started a dedicated project on this because a number of our community members had their blogs blocked or shut down, had been arrested. We have 4 of our writers in Ethiopia are in jail right now. They're on terrorism charges because they were blogging about politics and their constitution in their country. So we kind of we are in a strange space in which we both are covering the news and living the news. And so I think that the sort of wall or boundary between the reporter as this kind of objective entity who's just observing and writing the facts, and the person who's living the thing, does not really exist for us. And I think that as a kind of model to think about storytelling and reporting and journalism and all of the things that does for an open society, or ways that it can make a society more open, is important and exciting for us.
Thanks. My name's Tim Karr. I work for Free Press. Free Press is a US-based advocacy organization that fights for everyone's right to connect and communicate. We are lucky in a way, in particular relevant to this discussion, in that the issues that we work on include internet freedom and press freedom. We use the internet to save the internet, and that involves a theory of change that I'll talk about briefly. But one of the issues that you're probably all familiar with, is we work on and we have been working on very, very much lately, is net neutrality. Net neutrality has come to a head in the United States, as it has in a lot of other parts of the world. And in our particular case, it was triggered by the chairman of the Federal Communications Commission, who makes media policy with his fellow commissioners, making a decision that would have effectively allowed internet service providers to prioritize certain traffic on the internet while degrading access to other websites and services. He put this forth with the idea that it would get the support of the very powerful phone and cable lobby, which wields considerable influence in Washington, D.C., and he would get it approved without a problem. He kind of wrapped it in this language of the open internet so that we all thought it would be great. What we did was we responded, and we rejected his proposal. It hasn't been formally rejected, it's been rejected by the public. And we mobilized, as of earlier this month, more than 4 million people to comment in the public docket at his federal agency. Unprecedented amount of people, the largest amount ever comment on a rulemaking process. And we have effectively painted him into a corner where he can no longer continue to pursue this option because the public outcry has been so overwhelmingly opposed to it. in the middle of this process, a transparency organization in the United States called Sunlight Foundation looked at the comments that were put in the docket and found that 99% of the comments in this docket supported strong net neutrality and effectively opposed his proposal. So you have, what's going on there is you have a public official who is very politically engaged, who made a decision and got it thrown back into his face. And they've yet to formalize, to complete that decision, but we are now in this state of tension on net neutrality where people are wondering whether he's going to actually be a public servant or whether he will serve the interests of the phone and cable lobby, which a lot of people in Washington think that is their intention. And so what that example is about our theory of change. Our theory of change as Free Press, we're an organization that has 900,000 members. We do grassroots organizing in addition to policy work. Our theory of change is a term that some of you may be familiar with in the advocacy realm. Theory of change means is what do you do to make change happen? What is your theory? Our theory of change is called inside-outside organizing. And the example that I just gave is a good example of that. It's where we have inside Washington, D.C., in this case, people who are experts on the policies, who know the people in government. They know elected officials. They know federal bureaucrats. They know what's going on inside Washington. And we marry that to an outside strategy, which is grassroots organizing. We have more than 900,000 activists in the field. We have a network of allies that are grassroots organizers. So our inside experts will tell us, hey, there's an issue coming up, FCC going to make a bad decision. We need to put some outside pressure on them to make change. And so I just wanted to sort of set that frame for this conversation. Our theory of change, it's called inside-outside organizing, and it's not only effective in the United States, but I think would be very effective in any nominally democratic society where elected officials have to be accountable to the public in some fashion.
Great. Okay, so I'm Dave Steer. I'm the policy and advocacy guy for the Mozilla Foundation. We are a nonprofit organization, global. We run one of the biggest open source projects on the planet called Firefox. Who here uses the Firefox browser? All right. Love you guys. So yeah, that's an open source project that a great nonprofit organization created. Our theory of change, which I think that terminology is brilliant because it really puts on point this idea of, you actually have to have a really good strategy to impact the world the way that you would like to, and different organizations have different theories of change. And what we find is when you can clearly articulate the way you want to shape the planet, different organizations can actually come together in a really profound way. And I'll talk about what we have done in that. But our theory of change is really essentially that the web is going to be shaped by the people who make it. And so our theory of change is to teach people the web. Incredibly important, especially in the context from a public policy standpoint. Up until just a few years ago, we felt that you would shape the internet, shape the free and open web just by coding it. And I think we woke up and it really became clear that policy folks, either the folks who are writing the policy or the folks who are influencing the policy, locally, nationally, and globally, they're having every bit as much of an impact on the free and open web as the people who are doing the coding. And so our theory of change really is to teach people how the web works. And our idea is that if you can teach them how it works, they're going to stand up and be better advocates for it. So that's our theory of change. I thought I'd just say a few other things. But keeping on this theme, from a net neutrality perspective, it's just been an amazing example, particularly in the US, that I think we're going to see on issue after issue after issue, and we're going to see it globally, of how civil society and corporations who have a vested interest come together and impact change. You heard that just amazing stat of the amount of people who filed comments at the FCC. 3 months ago, most people didn't know what the FCC was, and that was crazy. And our theory of change on that one was was in order to support sort of the legitimacy of the comments that were being filed, we really wanted to teach people about how the web works. And so what we did was we created these teach-ins where people would learn about the topic, net neutrality. We would make it fun so it wasn't boring. We would actually not use net neutrality, the term, all too often. And we'd get people together physically, and they would actually learn for about 5 minutes and make stuff for the rest of the hour. And it was and do it globally. And it was really awesome. My personal anecdote on that one was I've got a 7-year-old kid. And you know, she thinks she doesn't understand what I do for a living at all. I dread going to her school and having to explain what I do to her classmates. But I did a teach-in with my kid, and I taught her net neutrality. And what we did was we remixed a comic book that was available online about a superhero and a villain. And the villain was the people who were going to create a fast lane and a slow lane for the internet. And they were bad, bad, bad. And the heroes were Team Internet. And there were people like you. And she created a superhero, and it was brilliant. And she walked away from it not understanding the technical theory, political theory around net neutrality, but she walked away from it understanding how the web works. And that's exactly what we want to see happen.
Right, well, I'm Chi Onwurah, and I am last, but not least, I hope. I'm the Member of Parliament for Newcastle Central and also the Shadow Minister for Digital Government, and I'm a Labour politician. I joined the Labour Party when I was 16, but I decided I wanted to be an engineer when I was 9. To be honest, I probably would have joined the Labour Party when I was 9, but they had a lower age limit, which technology does not. But the reason for that, and the reason that I spent 20 years building out networks, some of which are now building and designing networks, some of which are now the internet all over the world, actually in France, the UK, the US, and Nigeria, is because I believe passionately that technology and politics are the twin drivers of progress. So I guess that's my theory of change. And I also believe that networks are inherently progressive because they enable some of the things we're talking about, you know, collectivizing, exchanging, sharing. But they do have a tendency also to tip towards the most powerful. Think energy networks. Just leave that one with you. And so they can be captured, almost cultivized. And as someone who helped build out the internet, I can tell you that it was designed by people who were predominantly Western, predominantly privileged, very predominantly white, and almost exclusively male. And so did that give us the web that we want? Well, I think it gave us fantastic, you know, and we've talked about some of that as well, it gave us fantastic opportunity and fantastic products and services, but I don't think it did give us the web we want. And I'll just, you know, why I would say, you know, I know that for many of my constituents, whilst they do like using Facebook and stuff, but they suffer from what I call digital discomfort, and I'm trying to copyright that. And that's, you know, that's, you know, whether it's a fear that Google is following you, or that the government's listening to what you're saying, or Amazon is telling you what to buy, which it is, or just the spam, or the child porn, or the spam, you know, their fear of the internet, unfortunately and really regrettably, outweighs their understanding of the opportunities. And I think that's really, really wrong. But I also remember from my history lessons, if you look at the first industrial revolution, the initial benefits of that, didn't go to the folks working in the mills. The initial benefits went to the large mill owners and the industrialists. And this is another revolution. I think it's just as powerful, potentially more actually, than the industrial revolution, the digital revolution. And so what I want to help do, is to make sure the benefits go to everybody, from the start. And of course, so what does that mean in practice? Well, we need to stop thinking about the internet as something which is for, geeks, or, we need to think about it as being for everyone. And not everyone, can design a bus, but everyone should be able to get on a bus. And in a democracy, everyone should have a say in where that bus goes and how much it costs. And I think, we need a sense of ownership for people more generally of the internet. So how do you give people a sense of ownership? Well, one way of doing that is to let them own it, and that has different implications. Obviously, we need to make sure that almost everybody gets online. This government's digital inclusion strategy says that 10% of people will never get online. I think that's 7 million people. I think that's unacceptable. I think everyone needs to go online, and I think we need to give people the power to hold the internet and politicians. I really like what you said about that, to account. And so just one example to close on, as Ed Miliband said last February, I think it was, that people will own their own public sector data. And I'm, as Digital Government Shadow Minister, I'm responsible for leading a review to determine exactly what that should mean in practice. But for example, if you own your own data, the data that the Department of Works and Pensions or the Department of Education has about you, or if you're on benefits, the Job Centre has about you, that means you can be much more, that means you have the power to design your own kinds of services, people-powered services, and also to hold the government to account on what they're serving you. And it also means if you put all government data as open data as well, then you can see how quickly claims, whatever, are being dealt with. There's huge power in open data. So I think a combination of owning your own data, open data, digital inclusion will help give people a greater sense of ownership in the internet when it comes to government. And I think we need to see similar things from the private sector to give people a greater sense of ownership when it comes to that.
Excellent. Thank you very much. What we're going to do now is have a brief discussion amongst ourselves, but then open it up to questions. I'm just curious, how many people have burning questions at the moment? Okay, some more time for you to think then, I suppose. We'll come to those in a moment. Hopefully more of you will think of some. I'm interested in one of the age-old discussion points around the internet is around freedom to organise, freedom to communicate your messages versus security, whether it's your data or in some markets your personal safety perhaps. So I'm interested in what the panel thinks about where are we getting that right at the moment, where are we getting that wrong, what are the challenges?
I'll
Go for it.
So I think that there's a big mistake that a lot of politicians make in like suggesting that there's some kind of oppositionality there, that an open web means a less secure web. Sounds crazy to me. What we've been told, I'm just thinking about the US government, but the US government spying on, how many people in this room use Google for anything? Okay. Well, you heard about Snowden, I bet. So the amount of data that is collected about all of us and our communications is that just by the fact of that existing and being stored somewhere, I feel less safe than I would if I could nicely either use a service that really I could pay it a little bit and I wasn't paying for the service with my data, which is what we're all doing when we use free products like Google. So I guess that is to say that on the one hand, on the sort of we need more surveillance so that we'll be safer side, I don't really believe that's true. I also believe that that you have less trust in a society when you are living in a surveillance state on that side. And then on the other side, on the question of openness and free expression, being able to have open data, like you were saying, being able to sort of open things up and know what is your government doing and what are institutions and big companies doing, that too, and the ability for people to read it and talk about it and write about it and write their own opinions online, that's all kind of better for us. And yeah.
I mean, Chi, one of the things you mentioned was the participation and trying to get people informed. I mean, from dealing with your constituents, how informed do you think people are in terms of how much of their data is actually out there?
People are very informed. And in fact, there was a publication by the Royal Statistical Society, which I recommend. It was a poll by Ipsos Mori, which looked at exactly how people in the UK, the US, and the rest of Europe, we're all different, how they feel about who owns their data, who has their data and where. And there's a suspicion, but it's not, I would say, but it's not a concrete suspicion. It's not thinking that necessarily Google is going to, capture their data, but it's just why and how this happened. So what I think really strongly is that we need a better debate. We need a more informed debate, and we need a debate which helps inform my constituents, because if they do want to give up all their data to Google or to Facebook to get fantastic services, that's great, but they should know that they're doing it. And equally, whilst I agree with you absolutely that there isn't a trade, I mean, if you say there's a trade-off between surveillance and keeping you safe, it's like safe from whom, But I also, I was speaking to some police and crime commissioner who shall remain nameless, who basically told me that, if he had access to all the data held about everyone, everywhere, he reckoned he could fix crime. Now, even if that were true, I'm not sure it'd be what we want. Having said that, the fact that he does have access to people's licenses, car licenses, and can put that with owner, I think that's fine. So I just think we need to know where it is, what lines we're standing by.
I mean, Dave and Tim, I'm interested in some of the ideas you talked about earlier. It's very easy for governments, isn't it, to sort of say, look, we need to police things because you're not safe online, your financial information is not safe, perhaps your kids are being spied on. I mean, how are those arguments countered? I mean, how can we argue for that sort of more free internet that many people want? Oh.
Why don't you go first?
So, this is something that we've been working on for quite some time, because there are issues that we work on. We work on net neutrality issues. We work on privacy issues. We work on open source, open data, copyright issues. And for a long time, these were kind of siloed in a way where, that group, EFF works on privacy. People are probably familiar with that. And this group, ACLU, works on this other thing. And we have increasingly, over the last several years, not just in the US, but globally, recognize that this is all part of a larger movement, which is not built so much around issues, but built around principles. And that if we can agree to principles of free speech online, principles of data protection, access, that we can build a larger movement that's principle-driven and not siloed in a way, and then have this network effect where our power is multiplied. So we are very much in the process of combining these issues into a larger principle-driven movement. The Web We Want is not just a conference happening here this weekend, but the Web We Want is a coalition that is building international alliances around this set of principles. There are other efforts going on by other organizations. So that's really how we're addressing these issues, was by combining them, working out the differences. There are these differences of opinion between people who work on privacy and people who work on free speech issues, and working out those differences so that we can fight, which is a very real threat that takes the form both of governments and corporations, many of whom are collaborating with government, and create a very powerful response to this looming threat.
And how close are you to where you think you want to be? I mean, if 10 was that we've reached nirvana, we're exactly where we want to be. One's completely the reverse. I mean, how much progress do you think has been made?
Well, we've won some battles. We haven't, we've certainly won some battles. We've increased our ability to organize people. We've built great international partnerships. So we are, I don't know if there is an end goal. I mean, I don't think of this internet utopia. I think that it really is just identifying a common set of concerns and doing some really kick-ass hard work organizing to make sure that we have political power as internet users to protect ourselves against these threats.
Yeah, I think that's right. I'm slightly less bullish on where we are as sort of a movement. I would say we're 1% done.
Yes.
We've got a long way to go. We've made a lot of progress. I think the trend lines are very good, but part of the trend lines don't look so great. I worry that not enough people who understand how the internet works are actually going into the jobs that we need in NGOs or government, and that has a bad effect. If you have people writing policy or informing policy on how the internet operates who do not understand how the internet operates, you're going to get really bad laws. The other part of the trend line that I get really concerned about is this thing that you brought up. I'm less concerned about awareness than I am sort of this lack of agency. That as a guy who's been working on this for about 15 to 20 years, it has been amazing for me to see that people are starting to understand that they have personal information that they give to other people and that other people are doing something with it. What's the most concerning thing for me is not the awareness, and I think that could rise, but this shrugging of, well, it's just they're going to do with it what they want, and this sort of lack of agency to actually impact change. So I worry a lot about sort of lack of people feeling like they're in control, and I think that's a very big danger. And then I think the third thing I am concerned about is is a little bit more core. We created the web to have this ethos where anyone could make anything and share it with anyone. You didn't need to be rich. You didn't need to be a big, corporation. You could be somebody working in a garage with a great idea. And in so many sectors, and in so many pieces of policy, and in so many countries, we are seeing a lot of power come to the table of people who want to undermine a free and open web, and that to me is very dangerous. So I think we're 1% done. We've got 99% left.
I mean, Robin, one of the key roles, I imagine, in your job is organising and, as you said, campaigning on issues that matter to people. I mean, how much do you see this issue coming up on sort of web freedom versus security? Is it something that's important to people that you work with?
Yeah, I mean, I think it comes up all the time. Like, as much as we have a wonderful membership that keep us on our toes about our data policy as much as anything else, kind of more than anything, and kind of like, well, if I'm signing this petition, what are you going to do? Which is actually wonderful. But yeah, I mean, very much so. Like it comes up all the time, and also just one of the battles we have as well is in terms of kind of sharing messages, sharing this kind of like communication back and forth with members, and then there's using Facebook, for example, as a platform, and then Facebook just decide to turn everything down 50% because they can, or or whatever it may be. It's primarily one of the reasons we use email is that it's kind of direct correspondence with people as opposed to via someone else's platform which they're trying to profit from, and it's kind of it's a constant battle, just enabling big network communication between people, like using kind of tools that aren't going to bankrupt us, is an incredibly it's a tough job. Yeah, it's just, go on.
I was going to say, we should talk because Facebook was at the Labour Party conference trying to persuade me that I should be doing my engagement with my constituents on Facebook. So maybe, and obviously it's got, just like you say, it's got advantages, but I don't particularly want my constituents seeing ads for God knows what when they're. So I think we probably need a more neutral platform. And the other thing I would say was I went to a 38 Degrees meeting in Westminster about the perspective of HMRC tax sharing their data, and let me tell you, there was a lot of people there who were very angry. I think you're right about they might not have thought they could do something about it, but they were galvanized that something needed to change.
I mean, there's certainly a hunger, like we see, from all the to tackle, impenetrable kind of, big organisations, be it, the government, be it kind of, big corporations or whoever, it's kind of like that people are angry, and we have, it's kind of wonderful to see, one of the wonderful things about the internet is, we have like 82-year-olds writing into us going, well, I've done this and I've written to my MP and I'm angry, and it's kind of like, you hear a lot about, kind of collectivism being this thing, well, they're just clicking buttons and they're not really taking part in politics. And there's, an 82-year-old chap in his wheelchair at his house, he's not going to be storming, the barricades, but he's writing to his MP, he's engaged in politics and he's kind of taking part, and like, and for people to kind of like try and kind of diminish that as something, as kind of less than kind of, the kind of balaclavaed mob, like is ridiculous. But but there's certainly, let's say, a hunger from people to battle against these laws, and I suppose it's our job to try and harness that. Yeah,
I'm interested in this debate about how the web's changing politics. Obviously, there's a number of different facets to that. I mean, Emma, from a journalism perspective, you talked earlier about how you're encouraging participation almost story creation from people online. I mean, how do you see the political debate being shaped by online journalism, for example?
I mean, it's really interesting. It's a real time of change, I think. Party membership of the three main parties is at an all-time low. It's been steadily declining, and membership of trade unions as well. And at the same time, you've got this kind of rise of digital campaigning, which is kind of phenomenal. I mean, I think 38 Degrees have got 3 million members, and Change.org have got 6 million people, which is 1 in 10 people in the country have clicked on, have signed a petition on their website, and that's kind of incredible. And it's to a certain extent you can't compare the two. But also, I mean, if you look at like the Scottish referendum, that would indicate that people haven't necessarily kind of given up on traditional forms of politics. Because so many people have signed up for the Scottish National Party, and there's been a rise in membership of UKIP and in the Green Party, so it's kind of increasing in the marginals. But I think the web does have such a massive role to play in how people engage and how they are able to create their own narratives and to really humanize stories and humanize public debates in a way that is not necessarily always easy. And I actually think that also is a real issue in terms of the whole data debate, because it's such a difficult issue to humanize. I mean, when you've got on one hand, when you're asking the question, do I want to give all my data to a police crime commissioner who thinks he can save the world? Do I want to? When you've got on one side, it's sort of the idea of a terrorist strike, which is very easy to humanize, and on the other side, you've got data. It's important. It's not really a fair, equal span. So I think that is a huge challenge.
Sure. I mean, Chi, the next general election rapidly approaching. I mean, presumably, the digital campaigning aspect from the Labour Party or all the politicians is going to be very, very important. I mean, how do you see that role for Labour in the next general election?
Well, I think absolutely. I mean, already. I mean, I don't know if you're Labour Party members or just indicated that you're maybe Labour Party supporters. You will have been receiving a number of emails, I think, regularly, and the Twitter campaign on the NHS which was find out your NHS baby number. I forget how many, people signed up for that, but it was I think it was like 1 million or something. It was hugely successful, and obviously, the Obama campaign was sort of like highlighted as the high point, not the high point, but the groundbreaking in terms of digital. So I think it's certainly going to be incredibly interesting. But I should just say that I came here from a session of canvassing in Southwark, that is door knocking. The reason I still do that instead of just emailing people is because not everybody's on email. In fact, not everybody's on the web, but of those who are on the web, a greater proportion doesn't use email. And so I think you've got to understand the different demographics around who is accessible digitally. And I would really like some way of accessing people digitally, which they would, appreciate, because so many emails come at the wrong time or they're competing. So it's, so we've got a lot. I think we've got a long way to go, but I think we're doing a lot in the next election. Will show social media being much more effectively used in this country.
Ellery, keen on your thoughts.
Yeah, I wanted to tell a story because we're talking mostly about examples of countries where there is a fairly strong democratic system where people have voting rights. And as we know, in a lot of places where that isn't true, the internet has been a really, really important, powerful driver of people being able to talk and organize amongst themselves, despite not being able to have much of an influence on political process. Hong Kong is a really interesting example. Hong Kong has a sort of a funny relationship with China, and while people have many more freedoms there than they do in mainland China, they actually don't have voting rights, not wholly. And there's a group in Hong Kong for the last 7 or 8 years that has been organizing around this and in trying to push the government to change this policy. There was a promise that they would change it, and it just kind of kept getting pushed back due to pressure from Beijing. And this past summer, this group did an incredibly innovative thing, which was that they organized what they called a civil referendum. So they had their own referendum that was not, the state didn't run it. They worked with a university, and they organized this voting event where you could come and vote in person or you could vote online. And they developed a really strong, smart system that was pretty secure and not super hackable, although they did have some issues. And they got people engaged and invested in this through the internet, and then the actual process kind of happened online in large part. And I think they expected 300,000 people to vote, and in the end, it was nearly 1 million. So it was a really big, really, really powerful, exciting example of how you could actually show what the public feels. And this was, they were voting on the issue of voting rights and saying, yes, we would like those. So it was like a very, I thought, brilliant, innovative, and it took them years to do this. I mean, there was a lot of careful planning around the process and around how they would sort of structure the decision. But I think that sort of thing, I hope that example inspires people in other places to do similar kinds of things.
I'm keen to get some contributions / questions from the audience. Having not had very many earlier, I'm sure that there's going to be lots now, but if everyone wants to raise their hand. I'll start with the chap at the back, just because I know he raised his hand first.
I had a couple of questions. I wondered also, have you heard about the Hong Kong student process that's going on right now? Just picked it up on Twitter. There's 50,000 people protesting in Hong Kong. I guess it's got something to do with democracy.
Right, similar group.
And I just wondered how, you've got so much intellectual capital here, how you moderate the crowd, how you moderate responses. You have the crowd speaking, but how do you ensure you're getting a good representative sample of data, opinions, and how do you research who's talking to you?
David, Tim, which one of you wants to take that one?
Why don't you start and then I'll...
Well, I mean, we don't. We want people to get involved in the political process, and I guess there are forms of moderation. Like we had a coalition of groups involving with Free Press did a day of protest a couple of weeks ago called the Internet Slowdown, and it was a symbolic slowdown, that what we call the spinning wheel of death, that whenever a file slowly loads onto your site, we use that as a symbol of what could happen to the internet if we lose our net neutrality protections. And that we encourage people to click through on that icon to go to an action where they would call their members of Congress. We have technology where they give us their zip code in the United States, which identifies their elected representative and actually connects the phone and calls them. And we, a lot of people call and they don't say the appropriate things to their elected member of Congress. So we moderate that a little bit by giving them a script online, say, you might want to say this, this, and this. So I guess that is the extent. I mean, we try to educate them and then let them decide for themselves.
Yeah, the only thing I'd add to that, the spinning wheel of death was great. I mean, here's the deal. It's not all the time a pretty process. Democracy is messy sometimes. We have an internal sort of organizational structure that looks a lot like that. It's not always pretty. We enable anybody who works with us, either paid or volunteer, to tweet out things, and sometimes news leaks, and sometimes people will say things that aren't, sort of the corporation line. And our belief is that our role is to set a framework. I mean, just like you said, giving things like tips on how to speak to a policy folk is a good start. But over moderation is just not good if what you're trying to do is unleash the voice that people have, which is what we're aimed at doing. It's a great question, though, because if you get it wrong, you've framed it in a way that creates a bunch of trolls, and you've created a bunch of dialogue that actually doesn't help your topic or your goal. fortunately, we haven't really been in that space, but that can happen if it's framed in the wrong way.
And I guess, sorry, moderate's the wrong word, really. I meant, how do you know who's talking, how representative they are? So you've got a group of people in the crowd.
I think we'll try and just get, people can put their hands up for more questions. I'm keen that we've got about 5 minutes left, so I want to get as many contributions
and we can chat
possible.
afterwards on that.
Let's do things quick fire. So, gentleman there.
Collingwood, in the Principles of Art, defined the role of the artist to work to prevent the corruption of consciousness. As a practicing non-artist, I want to question the preconceived ideas of implemented, possibly subconsciously, in creating and setting up the internet. Do you think there's a danger of wanting to use the internet to explore ideas rather than instead wanting to use ideas to shape the form of the internet itself?
Who's got views on that?
Well, I think it's a really good question in terms of that your network. So networks are not. So I'm not getting onto your net neutrality things, but networks are not neutral. I mean, they should be designed to be neutral. And a perfect network, I would say, would have no resistance and it would have no concentration. But they are not neutral, and they can tend to shape the process of which they are meant to be sharing. And so I do think we need to be aware of the limitations of networks as a perfect sort of sharing and exchange, and as someone who has, spoken out against the lack of women in technology, I have been trolled by pretty unpleasant people, but I don't believe they're the majority of the people on the internet, but they are the people who use it. So I think it's a really good question, and I haven't got the answer.
Who else has got questions? The hand there at the back.
Oh, hi, I'm sorry, I'm terrible with names. So can I just point to the lady in the middle? Before you were saying that you wish you didn't have to pay Google, for example, with your data. Considering most of us probably post about 20 Google searches or interact with Google each day, how would you expect us to pay for that without data?
Well, what I meant was that there are services, like Google has to make money somehow, right? So, but they did this interesting, their company, that's their goal.
They have bills to pay too, don't
they did this interesting thing where instead of saying to all their users, hey, you give us a little bit of money each month or each year or whatever, and we in return will give you this service, they instead said, maybe better would be to make it free and we'll figure out some other way to generate revenue. And the other way is they have, more data about the way that like your brain works when it wants to know the answer to a question and all the other things I don't need to tell you guys. And they sell that, they make a good amount of money off of that and off of ads. So
and the I think it is really complicated in part because the internet that we enjoy right now is a free internet, but it's not. And part of the insight that I've heard other people talk about it in this way, is that the people consuming the net, they are actually not they're not the consumer or customer, they're the product. And they're being sold to the customer, and the customer is the advertiser. And that's the problem. It's not that people shouldn't, have a free internet or how would they pay, but the dynamic that has been reached right now is absolutely wrong, where people are products, and that's not what we should have.
I would also just note that there are email services especially, but other kinds as well, that you can actually pay a little bit for. And in most of those models, the idea is that that's how you're paying, like you would buy anything else. Just give them a little money, they'll give you the service, that's that.
The counter-argument to that, of course, with paywalls and things like this in journalism is that, if people can't or don't want to pay for these things, then it's limiting their access to information online. I mean, where do we see the balance there?
Well, I'm really quite anti-paywalls myself. I think it just massively limits. You couldn't do any of the things that the community team really do. I mean, you couldn't ask a prisoner wouldn't even be able to access your website, because if they didn't have the right money, an ex-prisoner. It just limits it to just a certain amount of people who are reading the Times or reading the Financial Times or whatever, and you're not able to. The wonderful thing about what the web has changed is that journalism is now a two-way street, whereas before it was just kind of you churning out articles and not really paying any attention to the impact of them, or getting any feedback from it. Whereas now, the public can have such a role in shaping that, and that's really amazing.
Any more questions? I think the chap in the front here, you've had your hand up for a while.
Yeah, so I'd be interested to hear from each of the panelists what they think the most significant Snowden revelation is. I think this is really important. It hasn't really come up yet, particularly from Chi, and what we're going to do about it.
Well then, Chi, on the spot, most important Snowden revelation.
Well, I think there are so many important Snowden revelations, I would say. I think one for me was, as someone who, as I said, helped build that they'd found a way of tapping the internet, of tapping the fibre cables, the light fibre cables, which wasn't actually detectable. And I won't go into it, but it was quite a brilliant solution. But I mean that in an absolute way. I mean, I had not anticipated that could be done. The other one, of course, I think overall, the most important one revelation is that the U.S. government uses consultants who use contractors to spy who don't believe in spying, and that was where that's their process. For me, the most important revelation was the lack of effective oversight, effective, knowledgeable, well-informed oversight of what was going on, and I think that was because the oversight structure in the UK, and I don't know about the US, was designed for a time before we had the internet. And so we were using the same rules as you were using for post for digital. And that gave far too much leeway to what, government or the surveillance agencies should do. So my overall lesson is you've got to keep up with the technology and make sure you've got the right governance structures for it.
And what specifically should we be doing about those oversight structures?
Well, we want a review of the because it's the security, the Parliamentary Security Committee. Labour has called for a review of that. It's currently, chaired by a Tory, and it meets often in secret, and we want a review of how that should be changed.
I mean,
I'm not sure I've got that word right. Is it the internet? Is it the Security Committee or?
Sure. Just expand it out to the rest of the panel. Is there anybody here critical of Snowden, or is the feeling generally positive?
Generally positive.
I thought as much, Robin.
I was just going. The most surprising thing about Snowden for me was actually seeing how little impact it had in the UK. Like in comparison to, there's a very similar organisation to 38 Degrees in Germany called Campact, and it's like their number one priority. Like they're like, everyone on their list is like, we have to be dealing with this. This is outrageous. It's unbelievable. And actually, like the UK, the Guardian covered it, a few other, but actually, it really, but it is, a lot of the papers just didn't, there's just not the anger, which I personally was expecting, I think, the Guardian did amazing, but everyone else, is just. And I think that was the most shocking thing for me more than anything,
Well, I'll just say on that a lot of my constituents summed it up as the headline is "Spies Spy."
Yeah.
Wow. They have other, which to them felt like bigger problems than that. But
I think, I just want to jump in because I think this is an important point. The Snowden revelations, I think, really brought in defined focus something that I think a lot of us have known for quite some time, but that there is this process of privatization of censorship. What was shocking in many ways was the revelation to the extent that the private sector was working hand in glove with the government to help surveil millions of people.
Yeah.
And the privatization of censorship, I think, is a concern that is going. Certainly another panel discussion, but something that we need to think about.
Yeah, one more point, I think.
Yeah, and I'll be really quickly on this one. I'll say shocking from a good perspective was Edward Snowden's a hero, and a lot of people are going to want to be like him. And so when I talked about, hey, I think we're down the wrong path, 70% of people with engineering talent are going to corporations, and a very small handful are going to the places to actually fight for the internet. Edward Snowden, the shocking thing for me is he's now become a role model and a hero for an army of people with tech talent to go and save the internet.
Something for policymakers to think about, I imagine. Okay, well, thank you very much to the panel. I'm sure it's a very interesting discussion. So we just, thanks to the panel.
Great job.